Okay, welcome back to John Howard Week. We are here with the final day of the week. It's been an exciting 4 days, and we're happy to have one more great day for you. As you well know by this point, you can find all of our videos and all the information on our YouTube channel, John Howard Society of PEI. You can also find it on our website, johnhowardsocietypei.com, and on our Facebook page. So we are back here for our final day, and we've got Chris Clay joining us from NCPI. Chris, thanks for joining us and coming in today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Josh. I would like to start off our session by acknowledging that we live on the beautiful island of Ebdiguet, the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people, where we get to work and play every day.
Thank you. Appreciate you starting us off with that. And yeah, I'll have you do a bit of an overview of kind of who you are and what you're up to, and then maybe we can talk a little more about that land acknowledgement.
Sure, not a problem. So I work with the Native Council of Prince Edward Island. Our goals are to provide supports to Indigenous men and women who live off of reserve on the island. I'm the coordinator of the Reaching Home project for the council. So I am a housing navigator and a homeless outreach worker.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we certainly cross paths frequently between all the meetings and services that we cross over on.
Oh, yes, weekly, pretty much.
Yeah, that's right, if not more. So let's go back to that land acknowledgement for a minute. I appreciate you doing that for us. I think that's an important way to set the tone and start things out here. But I thought for people who maybe are unfamiliar or haven't been a part of a land acknowledgement, I thought maybe you could just spend a couple minutes and sort of, without going maybe too deep into the rabbit hole, because that's kind of a conversation that could go for a long time, but just give us a bit of a synopsis of what the land acknowledgement means and why we do that at the beginning of our time.
Well, it's to recognize the history of colonization of North America and what's happened to the Indigenous community over the years is it's hard to hide these days. And it's good to acknowledge that, you know, the lands that we're on are not ours. As I said, we're in Mi'kmaq territory, so you know we walk on the lands that were once owned by the Mi'kmaq people, and I find it's an honor to be able to work amongst the Mi'kmaq community. I am not Indigenous myself, so I am an ally. I work very hard for the people that are the custodians of this land. And whenever I'm given the opportunity, I take it as an honor to remind myself and the people that I'm with that, you know, Ebdiguet is not just Prince Edward Island, it is Mi'kmaq territory. So
yeah, I think that's a great synopsis there. I appreciate that, and I like that you highlighted this idea of gratitude and appreciation that we have this opportunity to, as you said off the beginning, kind of work and play and live and do all of our day-to-day activities that we often take for granted on such a beautiful island and beautiful land, and expressing that appreciation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So let's sort of continue down that path for a minute. When we talk about Indigenous individuals or Indigenous services, and we kind of use that word Indigenous as a bit of an all-encompassing, wondered if you could just sort of outline a little bit about what that means or what that word Indigenous encompasses, because it is a pretty broad term, and there is quite a number of individuals or different groups of people that might be captured under that.
Well, I use the broad term of Indigenous because the Native Council, um, it we don't just deal with the Mi'kmaq community. We take care of anybody that winds up on Prince Edward Island. So um, in my client files, I have primarily Mi'kmaq people, but I work with brothers and sisters that are Ojibwe, Cree, Mohawk, um, Innu. They're just from all over the country. If people have migrated and found themselves on the island, then when they need help and support, they come our way.
Right. Yeah. So there's like a wide array of people from different groups and bands and locations that have come to reside here or spend time here. And so that term kind of opens it up to anyone, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's helpful for people to understand too, is that there is like a lot of different groups that fall under that, and that we might encounter on a day-to-day basis. And maybe you could just spend a minute sort of highlighting that piece, that like not all those groups are the same, right? Like there's going to be differences within them, even though they all could be identified as Indigenous.
Oh, for sure. If you look at the breakdowns of territories in North America historically, before the introduction of colonization, it was just like little mini nations and countries, and Mi'kmaq territory stretches from northern Newfoundland and the Maritimes down into Maine and a couple of the surrounding states and over as far as Quebec. But then as you move through the nation, you have Ojibwe and Blackfoot and Cree and Mohawk and more nations than I can think of, to be honest. So I quickly learned when I was welcomed into the community that you're not just dealing with one group of people. So as an ally, I've had to be very mindful of language and traditions, because different nations have different beliefs and traditions. And with everybody coming to the island, it's an interesting study. I've learned a lot, and thankfully, the people that I work with at the council have been very open to helping educate me when it comes to language, customs, that sort of thing. And anytime I have an issue or a question, I'm always pointed to the right knowledge keeper or elder who is able to answer those questions about customs.
Right. Yeah, and that's awesome that you've had that exposure and opportunity to go, right to the source and get that factual information and hear about the traditions from someone who's lived and carried them on.
Well, yeah, I've been welcomed into this community, so I've taken it upon myself to learn as much as I possibly can, whether it's the language, the songs, different customs that they do, because it's I find it's how do I say this? It's the least I can do.
Mm.
They welcome me in. The least I can do is learn their language and try and communicate and be a better person and more knowledgeable.
Right. Yeah. So in exchange for their hospitality of allowing you to be a part of that, you're feeling like, hey, I need to step up and also show that I want to be not just a part of that and sort of say that, but actually understand what it means to be a part of that and why those traditions are important.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really great. And I think that's a good maybe tip, if you will, for people to kind of know when they're whether it be sort of in our sector of working with folks that are Indigenous, or even just on a day-to-day basis, kind of interacting with Indigenous individuals, that, as you outline, like there's a lot of different customs and traditions. So maybe somebody comes in and one thing was, brought to our attention in terms of this is their cultural norm or what works for them. And the next person comes in and it could be completely different. So not to make those assumptions that just because it works in one culture or one group that it'll be the same for others.
Yes, exactly. Well, you and I have even talked about it. There's an Inuit that we work with, and I've gone to my peers and my coworkers extensively to learn how to pronounce his names, do greetings, small little things like that, because we work with the homeless community, and a lot of people just put them aside and categorize them. But to be able to walk up and greet someone in their own language and understand where they've come from, it's a sign of respect to the people that we work with. And a lot of them don't have really good days, and that might be a point to bring them up in a day that might not be all that great.
Yeah, that's a good point around, that acknowledgement is you taking that extra time and going that extra mile, to show that you're not just sort of showing up for the sake of showing up. You actually are there and interested and care.
Yes.
All right, I think that starts to kind of lay out for folks a little bit about kind of that Indigenous piece and what that is. I appreciate you helping me unpack that. I think that's a useful piece of bit of information for folks. When we start to, you mentioned elders and, knowledge keepers. I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about what that looks like here on PEI, because I think that might be something that we sort of, as a general population, assume it exists in some capacity, but maybe we don't, know the ins and outs, or kind of what's available, or what that looks like, or if people wanted to know more about that, what's that process kind of like?
Well, an elder or knowledge keeper in the community is someone with respect when they speak. Generally you take in the wisdom that's being passed to you. Unfortunately, due to the history of what's happened in North America, some of the first things that were done to the Indigenous community were to take away their traditions, their history, and their language. The history of the Mi'kmaq people is not a written history; it's a verbal history.
Mm.
And as generations went on, and there were less and less language keepers and speakers, you had less and less people passing on the histories and the traditions and teachings. So, the few elders and knowledge keepers that we have left on Prince Edward Island, are amazing. And through programs that we have at the Native Council, we're trying to expand that by teaching language again and customs, and whether it's crafts or working outdoors in the woods on with medicines, or speaking the language, or singing the songs. The few people left on the island that speak fluent Mi'kmaq are working quite tirelessly to spread that knowledge, before they're gone.
Yeah, no, that's I think it's really great that you're trying to embrace that and share that. And I think that maybe segues into sort of something that I thought we could talk about, which was the importance of having Indigenous specific services. So I think you started to kind of touch on that a little bit with some of the work that you spoke about that the council's doing. But I wonder if you could dig into that a little more around the importance of that, and why those services are beneficial to have something that's Indigenous specific.
Well, I think it's important to have Indigenous specified services, just specifically for the cultural aspect. Um, you can go into an office and they're all pretty cold and clinical, but when you come to the council for support, you're automatically in a place of your people.
Mm,
The Indigenous community suffers, higher than average rates of homelessness, incarceration, suicide. And a lot of it is because of the intergenerational traumas that have happened. So a lot of service providers, as fantastic as they are, they don't deal with the generational traumas and things like that. So when someone comes into the Native Council for support, you're working right off the bat with people who know what's happened and know what you're going through, and it's a lot easier to connect.
mm.
And as I said, with the higher than average numbers, we're kept quite busy.
Yes, I'm sure there's no shortage of folks who need your support. I think that's a great way the way how you laid that out of when people show up, there's a safety or a comfort that maybe they wouldn't have going other places. And I suspect a lot of that has to do with that trust piece.
I think so.
And you also kind of spoke about the intergenerational trauma and understanding the culture. Can you talk a little bit about, you've spoken about sort of somewhat of your journey of learning about it, but this idea of cultural competency and what it entails to actually dig in and understand traditions and customs and things that are a part of a culture that's not your own.
Well, I took it as a challenge. I heard people around me speaking a language that I'd never heard before, and I kind of set out to learn it. We have a language and drumming course which teaches Mi'kmaq, and when I first started with the council, the facilitator for that course would make sure that I learned a new word every day. And I couldn't leave the office until I could say it. So I enjoyed the challenge of it. The work that I do is often fairly dark, and I see people at their worst. So to have bright little moments in the jobs, like being able to sit down and learn a song or learn a bit of the language I've always kind of taken that as my therapy. But for people in general, like, you have to realize the history of what was done to the Indigenous community is not pleasant.
Right.
It's not encompassed in the 1 or 2 pages of our history books when we go through school. So you quickly learn that the customs and traditions of the group that I work with have been defined and dictated by, the past 150, 200 years worth of history, and not so much the thousands of years that were there before. And so to know the history and know a bit of how the culture works and how they've regrouped and helped heal within the community makes it easier to provide support for the people that we work with, because like I said earlier, you know a bit more of the history, you know what they've gone through, and I've always just, the more I can learn, the better off I am. And anybody that I've introduced to the culture that's not part of the community has looked at it the same way.
Yeah, it's a great attitude to have, is that curiosity and desire to become more informed and more educated, and to better understand the folks that you're going to try to support. I think that that's a good point too. Around it's hard to really support those folks as best as possible if you don't have a good understanding of that history and what brought them to where they are today.
Oh, that's definitely a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And maybe we could segue that into something that you and I have shared being a part of, and that I know Native Council and particularly yourself are involved in, and that's the Kairos blanket exercise. So I wonder if you could, for folks who have maybe never heard of that, or even if folks have heard or maybe been to one, maybe you could just kind of give a bit of an overview of what that's like or what that's all about for people.
The blanket exercise is a hands-on, as you've learned, approach to showing a brief snapshot of the history of colonization. You essentially start with a large circle of blankets, and as the program progresses, the blankets are taken away, representing the land that was taken in North America, or Turtle Island, as it's called. And eventually, what goes from being a group of people on the blankets, you end up segregated, broken up onto reserves. And you quickly learn the harsh side of the history, improper trading practices, the taking away of the land, and eventually, the residential schools and the history behind that. And then it finishes by showing, the beginnings of truth and reconciliation, and how you can find a path to be together and to be just to understand what happened historically to people. And you hear the term intergenerational trauma thrown around, and a lot of people don't understand, but the people that we work with today are affected by not just what's happened to themselves, but what their parents went through, whether it be the 60s scoop or their grandparents in the residential schools. So, you're seeing 3 to 4 generations of trauma and neglect, and not knowing how to, be parents or be part of the community, because the community has always worked against the Indigenous people. So it's the Kairos blanket exercise. I would highly recommend anybody having a chance to do it. The Native Council actually today is performing one for the RCMP on Prince Edward Island.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can attest to it being a very powerful and emotional experience, which I'm sure you've seen time and time again in the ones that you've been a part of.
Yes.
And I know, I've heard you note before that the one that we were in together was maybe even more powerful than some of the others, given the personal relationships in the group.
Well, I've been part of the Coordinated Access Committee for coming on 4 years now. And, the work that we do is very hard. And the people who have managed to stay, focused and know what they're doing and do everything that they can to help are the people that I respect the most right now in my day-to-day life. And, I hated to see, people that are so close to me, cry and upset. But as one of the participants in the one that you and I were in, I said sorry, and she said, no, don't say sorry. Say you're welcome for learning this. And, that sat with me. But Yeah, I had a hard time. I really struggled with that one, and it sat with me for a couple of weeks after.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can appreciate that. I was really grateful to be a part of that, and I certainly am much newer into the community than you are, and I still felt the impact. And so you mentioned that that's something that people can sign up or participate to be a part of. Before we move along to any other kind of discussions, do you want to just sort of throw out there how people could find information about that, or where they could get access to that?
Reach out to the Native Council. Don Knockwood is the coordinator right now that runs the program. It is so popular. We ask that you try and book events 2 to 3 months in advance. I know it's a long wait, but it is definitely worth the wait. And the email, I believe, is kbe@ncpei.com.
There you go. Perfect. Short and sweet. Thank you for that. One of the things that you mentioned as part of the progression through the exercise that's more kind of towards the end and it builds towards is this idea of truth and reconciliation. And I know we now have Truth and Reconciliation Day as an annual holiday or stat day, if you will, or celebration opportunity. I wonder if you could touch on that a little bit and sort of what that represents and how people can get involved in that when when that comes back around in the fall there.
Well, it just represents an opportunity to learn. As I've kind of, highlighted a couple times through this interview today, is like, you should take the opportunities to learn. Truth and Reconciliation has been attached to basically the federal government's policies towards the Indigenous community in the past, 15 to 20 years. Um, I find Truth and Reconciliation Day to be a good day because I work with the council, so it's a day of reflection. But a lot of people just kind of look at it as a holiday. I think Truth and Reconciliation Day should be, a day where you take some time to learn about the community or the land that you live on. I know my daughter is a Girl Guide leader, or Brown, guides, and they make sure coming into Reconciliation Day that their last session together is a lesson learning about the lands or the medicines, things like that come from the land that we live on, because it is traditional lands that we're on. And you look at the city that we live in, but you can go 10 minutes out of the city and be back with Mother Earth and alone with the Creator. And the medicines still grow on the island. And to take the time to learn about things like that is something that I think everybody should do. So on Reconciliation Day, take the time to learn about the community. Last year we did, I'm only bringing this up because you mentioned the Kairos, but we did a mass blanket exercise at UPEI, open to anybody who wanted to come, just as our way to teach about the histories of what's happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, first of all, fantastic that you did that, because I know you ended up with quite the turnout, and I'm sure that was a unique experience for yourself and everyone else involved. And then, I have heard feedback, if you will, from other folks who work in the Indigenous community that there is that aspect to that Truth and Reconciliation Day of like, it's great that there's a day to recognize that, but it also is important to realize that it's not just something that can occur that day. And like you said, there needs to be some purpose or intention attached to that, rather than just sort of a day that we check off on the calendar and move along with.
Yes, well, it's like Orange Shirt Day for the Every Child Matters movement.
Hmm.
It's great to see a day where everybody wears orange. It's one of my favorite colors. But that day should be taken to learn about, why every child matters and what's happened to the children over the past, two, three generations. That's what the whole movement's about. It's not just about wearing a shirt. It's actually learning about, the residential schools and the government breaking up Indigenous families, and people quickly forget. Take time to respect and learn the history of what you're actually celebrating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a good point to take into around it doesn't have to be this sort of cumbersome, time consuming process just to acknowledge and learn and express your gratitude. We talked about sort of the land acknowledgement off the top. We talked about connecting with nature. We talked about sort of seeking out information, attending a Kairos blanket exercise. So there's a lot of different ways that people can interact and learn without having to, disrupt their daily routine all that much. It can be a pretty easy way to get involved.
Yes, exactly. Well, recently I look at a walk in the woods. I've recently been taught how to harvest birch bark.
Hmm.
So now a walk in the woods is a whole different experience because I can see trees that have been harvested and trees that haven't, and it's neat to be able to walk with that knowledge.
For sure. Yeah, it gives you a whole different perspective when you're out in nature and to think about it that way. And I know for me personally, once a year, typically we go back to Algonquin in Ontario and we do a backpacking trip for a weekend and take nothing with us aside from what's on our back and live and, camp out in the woods and no technology. And it is a whole experience to just get back to being grounded with nature and connect on that level. And I always find that to be one of my favorite times of the year.
That would actually be really fun.
Yes, some folks are terrified to not, have a whole lot in your backpack or a whole lot with you, but there's something freeing about it that I really enjoy. Um, let's move along for a second here to the sort of partnerships and interactions and in ways in which Indigenous organizations such as NCPI are collaborating and working with other non-Indigenous organizations, to better serve the cross populations that they're both interacting with, and how that collaboration and working together piece can occur in our community.
Well, the work that we do with coordinated access, I find is second to none. The wraparound support system that we've managed to create here is I think one of a kind, but we're in a unique position because the province is so small.
Hmm.
I've quickly learned that when you go to larger centers, what we're doing here that works well doesn't work quite as easily. But because we have members of the Indigenous community that are homeless and really struggling, whether it be with addictions or mental health issues, like many other islanders, but we're working together with the different groups that are all in coordinated access. It gives me access to mental health workers and addictions treatment and housing. And, if we can't fully help, we know that there are allies out there that we can reach out to that will find us the help that we need for our clients.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point around this idea that even though your sort of focus in on a bit of a specific population, if you will, you're still viewing yourselves as sort of part of that circle of care as a community. And one aspect of that is what you're up to. Yet at times, you know, there'll be other people who can offer something that'll be beneficial to the folks that you serve, and there can be that collaboration.
Yes, exactly. And you know, and some people that wind up on Prince Edward Island, you know, from Etta Province, don't know that we exist. So through that circle of support, they might go to John Howard Society first, or CMHA, or the Community Outreach Center, but then they're quickly sent to us for, you know, the proper cultural ties that come with the support and healing. And I find that that level of collaboration is second to none. So
Yeah, no, I think that's another good point to touch on, is that yeah, people can flow from other services into Indigenous specific services, recognizing that that might be what's the best fit for them. And then there's maybe people who went to Indigenous specific services because that's what they identify as, but then maybe also need some non-Indigenous services. So there can be that flow in and out of those services, and those two kind of can work together, right?
yes. It's kind of like in Summerside, we have the Winter Street Shelter. It's open to anybody. It doesn't matter if you're Indigenous or not, but we still provide the cultural teachings, but we don't exclude anybody who's in there. So if you want to participate in whatever cultural teachings are happening at Winter Street, all you have to do is be a resident. You know, and it's things like that, the openness and the willing to share knowledge, and that's what we're all trying to do when we in our day-to-day work.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really cool example of where, like you said, somebody could come in and maybe have minimal to no knowledge or understanding of the Indigenous traditions, and then be like, yeah, all right, I'll check this out and see what it's all about, and maybe become something that they're quite interested in or enjoy being a part of, just from that exposure and opportunity.
No, I agree. Before I started with the Native Council, I actually worked at the Outreach Center. And we'd had a rough week with an Indigenous client. He had gone through 2 overdoses, and I was taken out for a sweat to clear all the bad and negativity in my body. And that was my first ever introduction to any Indigenous teachings, and I fell in love. And, you know, within 2 months of the sweat, I was working at the council and learning language and drums and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, to be inclusive is a huge part. And I think, you know, when we have the ability to pass knowledge like that onto the you know, the people who are struggling that we work with, it's a great thing that we can do.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, that inclusive piece is also a good way to keep those knowledge and traditions going. As you talked about earlier, it's you know, it's easy for that to get lost with so few elders and knowledge keepers left. And so if people that are non-Indigenous are interested in learning about that, then they'll spread that information, and it kind of lives on in other ways, right?
Oh yes, for sure.
All right, we're moving towards the end of our time here, and I think we've had some good discussions about the individuals and services. I'm wondering if, as we kind of wind down here before we go into specifically the Native Council, if there's anything else you want to touch on or share as it pertains to some of the things that we've chatted about here today.
No, I think I've pretty much gone through everything I can think of today.
Okay, no problem.
I thought this discussion would actually be more focused on, the work that we do through Reaching Home. I'm quite surprised and happy that this is the direction that we took the discussion today.
Yeah, I think this has been more beneficial than that alternative would have been. And I think this has been a great chance for people to learn about this information. So in terms of the work that Native Council is doing, is there anything you want to kind of highlight about some of the services or programs or projects or anything that's going on that you'd like people in the community to have a sense of?
Well, the Reaching Home project has been a very beneficial program to the Indigenous community that I work with. I'll always have to kind of, boost up my own program first. But we have an excellent program right now with the mental health and addictions navigator.
Okay.
She's recently joined us in the past few months and is starting to, get out into the community and get known. And we're starting to see a lot of positive impacts from the work that she does. We're also restarting in the next week or so our language and drumming class. So it is for the Mi'kmaq community as a chance to reclaim their language and their songs and their traditions. We hold courses every week in Summerside, St. Peters, and Charlottetown, as well as a virtual class. If someone is interested, please visit our website at www.ncpei.com. And other than that, there'll be some more new programs coming up in the spring.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool that you've got the drumming and language coming back. I just think the drumming is such a physical, tangible activity that when you pair that with something like language, which is a little more kind of has that classroom vibe to it, that it's a neat way to pair those two activities together where it's fun and educational at the same time.
Yeah, that I never thought in my life that I would A, have the rhythm to drum, or B, be able to sing in another language. But I've shocked myself in the past year or so.
That's a great example of that fact that anything's possible, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on here, Chris. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. I hope that you took something away from today and learned something. I certainly got a few tidbits that I didn't know before we chatted today. Thanks for everybody that's been a part of John Howard Week and tuned in throughout the week. It's been great to be able to host this, and I appreciate everybody who's come on and spent their time with us. Again, you can find us, John Howard Society of PEI. You can find our YouTube channel to find all these videos, John Howard Society PEI.com on the website, and our Facebook. And we will be putting up a resource sheet on the website that will list all the different organizations, including Native Council, that came on this week with their website, and so how you can go to their information and find more about them. So, Chris, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on here, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being invited.
Yeah, anytime. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk soon. But until then, appreciate it and have a great day.
All right. You as well.